So often you can go to a museum or see an image of a famous painting online and think to yourself, I could do that. If you are an artist or an art lover, you might be smart enough to know that this is not the case. But do you know why? What makes art? Who decides what is what? And what happens when something that is not considered art elicits strong reactions so that people become angry upon seeing said work and not because of any other obscene reason? No, simply just because it exists. Today, we are talking about vandalism in the art world, both historic and modern examples, modern art, and the massive waves it casts on the art scene, the primary colors, and an attack on a painting which asked a simple question and got a very violent answer. Grab your easels and clean off your brushes because we are getting artsy on another episode of The Remedial Scholar.
That's ancient history.
I feel I was denied critical, need to know information.
Belongs in a museum, bro.
Stop skipping your remedial class.
Welcome to The Remedial Scholar. I am your host, Levi, and I am happy to be here with you. If you are new, thank you for joining us, and if you have been around for a while, thank you for returning. You might be asking yourself, what the heck is going on with the release schedule, Levi? And that is a very valid question. As I finish my final semester in school, I need pretty much all the time I can get for my coursework, and so to maintain that and not give up on you, I'm going weekly, 2 episodes a month until school gets out and I have time to dedicate my freedom towards the proper time it takes to crank out episodes weekly like I would like to. I know that isn't standard, but I love doing this and I don't want to stop, and this is the best way for me to keep going while I finish school. So thank you for understanding, and if you don't, well, that's just plain rude. No, I get it. Anyway, that's all I have for announcements, so we can get right into the episode. If you know me, then you know I am also an artist. I've been drawing since as long as I can remember and have vivid memories of doodling my little heart out as a child. My mom liked to tell people that when I was little, I would spurn the crayons and markers that she bought for us and instead take a pen and printer paper and just be perfectly content with that. To this day, I work mostly in graphite, seldomly working in colors unless it's like a watercolor or abstract painting. It's not that I don't enjoy it, it's just because, I don't know, I just enjoy grayscale drawing so much more than just in color. Maybe it's because it's evident to me that it's a drawing, or maybe it's because it gives the image like a really classic feel, or simply that it feels real, like feels authentic. Either way, that is my bread and butter. Does this have anything to do with anything? Not particularly, but we are talking about art here, so what better way to dip our toes into this episode than for me to give a little artistic background. Obviously, if you're watching on YouTube, you can kind of see I have a lot of artsy things about. I have some Legos and a Goku statue back there too. Don't get me wrong, I'm also kind of nerdy, but that's okay. But anyway, today we are talking about art vandalism, and the story of Barnett Newman and the painting that caused someone to stab and slash it, which then inspired some very major failed restoration attempts on that said painting. So, when talking about art, especially with people who are not artists, you get a few different reactions. First, and probably most common, is, well, I can't even, or can barely draw stick figures. I get that one a lot. Humble to say the least. The other thing you might hear, primarily when discussing modern art, is, oh, well, I could do that. Oh yes, as sure as the tide. If you're bringing up or are around anyone when it comes up, people love to tell you that they could definitely create a piece of abstract art. It seems easy enough. Grab some paint, toss it on the canvas with no intention, and bam! Jackson Pollock Jr. Paint a large square on a different colored square, and congrats! You're now Mark Rothko. Of course, if you have no real care for art or to learn more about it, then it will be exactly as you see. Abstract Expressionism of those two artists is nothing more than splatters on canvas, blobs of color, no real message, no real meaning. It's important to look at the movement in terms of a reaction to reality, just as social realism would be born from events like the Great Depression, or surrealism flourishing in Europe following the conclusion of World War I. Abstract Expressionism followed World War II. Now, if you have some critical thinking abilities, you might be able to see why something such as this would occur. Firstly, you have Europe in the midst of World War II, and some of these painters have to paint vaguely to conceal the meaning from the oppressors. This would continue as the war concluded, especially in America with the McCarthy era. Political messages were heavily scrutinized or censored, and the best methodology was to display something with either no message or one that people could not interpret on their own. What's more is that these artists were taking what surrealism did to dreamscapes and pushing it into the land of the awake, the conscious, right? They used color and movement to garner feelings or express themselves, and others gravitated towards it. At first, it was a novelty, surely, but this also came with ridicule. The old guards always fight hard as they lose their dominance amongst the trending. Another interesting thing to consider is how the outbreak of World War II and the total domination over much of Europe by the Nazis actually created these artistic and cultural vacuums around the world. This also worked twofold because now there were a lot of Europeans who had fled to the United States for safety, primarily in New York, and not that it needed it, but it became much more of a hub for the creative types as they arrived. The Cubists, the Surrealists, Futurists, Impressionists arrived in droves and influenced the American artists who did not get drafted or enlist. I believe this is what helped push out the Abstract Expressionism, and by proxy also made it sort of an extension of Surrealism in a way. If you have artists who are Surrealist artists and you have them interacting with American artists who are trying to be different, and then the war ended and the hunt for political communists was on, they had these tools to bounce off of, essentially. This would give the groundwork for people like Pollock, de Kooning, Rothko, and major artists of the episode today, Barnett Newman. Now, the other thing is to consider is that the sheer brutality of what was going on in World War II also pushed these guys into a position where they're like, okay, well, that was a lot. Like, we dropped a nuclear weapon on a country. Like, this is crazy. Like, reality isn't what they had been painting this whole time. Like, now it has changed drastically. And so they were left with, where should we go from here? Now, I threw a lot of terminology at you real quick there, but I want you to know that it is actually not all that complex. And if you are not artistic at all and still enjoy the things like this, I'm going to explain these different art styles and when they when about they were popular, just so we can kind of tie all of this together nicely. Jumping back in time, we have obviously the biggest one that people jump to is like Renaissance art, Michelangelo, Leonardo da Vinci, Donatello, all of the Ninja Turtles, which, just like the period which takes its name, was the rebirth out of the gloom of the Middle Ages. You can tell this artwork apart from others because the people look very similar to one another. It's usually kind of a religious overtone to them. Everyone's skin is very soft looking. Mona Lisa, the Sistine Chapel ceiling, that's all Renaissance time. Then moving from the Renaissance to Baroque is really defined by the varied poses and intricate faces people are making. Very sharp contrast in lighting also. In a lot of these, the faces are more expressive and human looking. If you've ever seen a Rembrandt, then this is that era, which lasted from early 17th century until like the mid 18th century. Now, for a more layperson example, think of the one meme of that guy that's pointing and making a silly face, aka Joseph Decroix. Google him and you know exactly what memes I'm talking about. Baroque gives way to a few different branches, but most notably of that, Romanticism. This was the first in a long line of revolts against traditionalists of art at the time. This is in the late 18th century and is typically characterized by some really intense imagery that involves some type of intellectual basis. There's, a tie to Romanticism artists in the Age of Reason or Age of Enlightenment, and this is where we start to see paintings that don't just depict Bible scenes or a rich person or a king. We start to see images brought out of cultural arts, the literature that's being written at the time. We have images like that of Francisco Goya, who painted some more iconic Romanticism pieces around. Most notably, Saturn devouring his son. That's probably the most, I see that one a lot. I mean, it's mostly in memes now, but I see it a lot. There's also the Fallen Angel painting, which is best known for the tearful eye, which scorns the viewer. Pretty famous. It's depicting Lucifer after he was cast down. Obviously, a little more religious overtones, but also not just Jesus, not just Mary. It's you have these nuanced approaches because they're enlightened, they're really reading into things. Now after this is where it really takes off. You have Impressionism, which came to the fold in the late 19th century, and these are the dots of color that make up a larger picture, pioneered by people like Monet, and paving the way for the post-impressionism with the likes of like Van Gogh. The difference between the two is that impressionists painted what they saw, post-impressionists kind of painted what they saw and what they felt. They used colors that weren't really there. They made images more symbolic and less realistic in nature. If you look at a Monet, like the lilies or the Japanese garden, and you see that bridge, you're like, okay, I know that's a bridge that actually exists. But then you see Starry Night by Van Gogh, and you're like, okay, well, that could be a real place, but it also looks like an illustration of a place that nobody has ever seen. Like, it could be made up, right? So that's kind of the technical differences. Now, this would directly influence the birth of Expressionism, which pushed the feeling apart from post-impressionism further and gave more to distorted and fantastical images. Then you have a flurry of things like Cubism, which answered the question, what if you could see all sides of something at the same time? And this is the style beloved by one Pablo Picasso. Then you have Surrealism, which is like dreamlike sequences, things that look familiar but are not from reality. Artists that are most notable from this era, Frida Kahlo, Salvador Dali, like these kinds of people where, they're painting things that you are like, okay, I know what that is, but that's not where it usually is. Or like there's something funky going on with it. That's Surrealism. Now, all these did not happen exactly when I mentioned, and some of them adapted and changed over time, and there's plenty of overlap with the older styles remaining as time kind of marches on. But I wanted to give you that, and as I feel like those are like things people might not know for whatever reason. Maybe they don't want to ask, or nervous to look it up for some reason. So hopefully that didn't bore you to death. But now that we have like a quick art history lesson under our belts, let's talk about the other half of this topic. Someone spends hours and hours, weeks, months, even years working on a painting, only for someone else to come along and ruin it in minutes. Who would do such a thing, and why would they do it? I think the biggest reason someone would do it today is for attention. But there have been reasons in the past, and I want to give you a few examples before we get into the real meat and potatoes of today's episode. The second reason, besides attention, is maybe even in addition to it, is usually a statement, political, cultural, something like that. This practice usually dates very far back, because as long as we have had cultural affinity and crafty people have been smashing those things. So the Romans defacing local deities, or crusaders smashing Islamic effigies, and so on. Sometimes negligence is a factor as well, like in 1750 when scissors were taken to Rembrandt's supposed masterpiece, The Night Watch, to crop it down to fit it through a door. Hardly violent, but definitely disappointing. This would not be its only run-in with a sharp object, as it was attacked in 1911 by a shoemaker who was out of a job, down on his luck, felt like this was a good way to vent his frustrations. The painting survived this encounter because it had a thick varnish on top of it, and it would be 64 years before it was attacked once more, and once more by an unemployed person, this time with a bread knife by an unemployed teacher. This is the beginning of what sounds like a game of Clue, honestly. It's a bread knife by an unemployed teacher in the art gallery. This man, Wilhelmus del Riek, said that he was ordered to do it and that he did it for the Lord. So, pretty fun. After 4 years of work, the slash marks were repaired. Once more, in 1990, it was attacked by a man with acid. Not on acid, but with acid. A quick acting security guard sprayed water onto the wit, which prevented the acid from penetrating past the varnish. Saved by the varnish once again. Let's go. Shout out to varnish. The painting has not been attacked since and has actually been extended, which is like the opposite of what some of these guys tried to make happen. With the use of AI, they were able to bring back the cutoff section, which they have printed and displayed with the painting, so you can kind of see the full vision of what Rembrandt had painted. So that's kind of cool. I mean, it's obvious, like, there is a definite textural difference between the oil painted, varnish covered painting and what I'm assuming is a printed canvas wrapped over like a core of some kind. I don't know what, but one of the most famous, well, probably the most famous, yeah, I'll say it, most famous painting of all time was vandalized several times, or attempted, I guess. The Mona Lisa, the portrait by Leonardo da Vinci, was doused in acid in 1956, which ruined its frame. The same year it was also stoned. This guy threw a rock at it. How wild is that? Good aim too, because it's really not that big of a painting. That's the fun fact that everybody likes to share about the Mona Lisa. Hey, did you know it's actually not that big? Okay, still cool, whatever. Ever since then, it's been behind bulletproof glass and has been repaired from those events. In 1974, a woman tried to spray paint it. Obviously didn't work. And then in 2009, someone threw a cup at it, which, funnily enough, she had bought from the gift shop at the Louvre. I guess a bad review on Google would have been too easy to do. And then 2 years ago, someone smeared cake on the glass it sits behind, telling the onlookers to, quote, think about the earth. And then just earlier this year, climate activists threw a soup at the glass as well. And their mission worked, as we were talking about it right now, obviously. So, but it's just kind of weird. Similar group is also responsible for souping a Van Gogh in an effort to protest fossil fuels. These protesters asked, what is more important, art or life? Which I feel like is kind of like a false equivalency, right? Art is life, man. Art imitates life, and we imitate art. I am he, as you are me, and we are all together, man. No, but seriously, obviously they got attention that they wanted, but these guerrilla protesters have so many better targets they could go after, like infinite targets that would have just the same impact. You know, jam up a freeway if you hate fossil fuels. Well, you don't like them driving? Make them stop. I don't know. Don't listen to me. This is not legal advice, but definitely don't attack the art. Like, it didn't do anything to you. So you might be sitting there thinking, well, of course, the paintings got hurt. They are simple canvas and then fragile things. Well, I got news for you, buddy. Sculptures can be vandalized too, homie. The thinker, Auguste Rodin's seminal work was hit with a pipe bomb in 1970. That's right, pipe bomb. That's crazy. Authorities believe that the suspects behind it were actually the Weather Underground Organization, or WUO for short. No, I'm going to say the whole thing because I can't say WU real quick back to back like that. This is the same terrorist group that did some things like the riots in 1969 and also breaking Timothy Leary out of jail. Now, that is one interesting fella. Like, quick side note, he was one of those guys who was at the forefront of the counterculture movement as a psychologist and advocate for psychedelics, not unlike that of one John C. Lilly of Dolphin Point fame. Anyway, the Weather Underground also did a number of domestic attacks to protest the U.S. involvement in Vietnam, and they used pipe bombs on several places. But the ironic thing is the only time they killed anyone was when their bomb-making facility exploded, and 3 of them died in that. So, Leonardo was not the only Ninja Turtle to have his works attacked. Another sculpture made by Michelangelo was attacked by a man with a hammer. The Pietà, a work of marble that depicts the Virgin Mary holding Jesus after the crucifixion, was struck by a man named Laszlo Toth, who exclaimed, I am Jesus Christ, risen from the dead, which is weird because, I mean, I don't like pictures of myself getting taken, but never once have I thought to smash them, right? If you're Jesus, why do you hate this sculpture so much? It's a good sculpture, dude, chill. He hit this marble sculpture 15 times with a hammer. This is one that was kind of really wild because this sculpture is probably it's one of the main ones done by Mac. Like, obviously David's probably more famous, but if you're Catholic and in Italy, the Pietà is probably the most. Like, you don't care about David because that's just some Greek anti-hero guy, right? Like, whatever. But the Pietà, that's the Mother and the Son and the Holy Spirit. I know I messed that up, but you know what I mean. So the fact that it got hit 15 times before bystanders could tackle him is wild. Also, in my reading, I found that they singled out an American that helped, and they said the American just started punching the guy, that's what we do, baby. We punch people. So he was sentenced, in his attack, he broke off Mary's arm from the elbow down, her nose, her eyelid, really messed her up. He was sentenced to a mental institution for 2 years, and then he was sent back to his home country of Australia, which, when I read that, was kind of hoping it was just sent to Australia, like Italy hadn't gotten the memo that Australia was no longer a prison colony. Get him out of here. Hey, smash the Pietà. There you go. I could go on and on about artwork being vandalized and, whatnot, but I think you get the idea. There are plenty of famous works by artists like Picasso, good, inside joke for some of you, Claude Monet, Mondrian, many more that have been, attacked. Like I said, plenty of reasons. People just a little wacky. Some were fueled by protests, others to get their own name out there. Like one man who vandalized a Rothko by signing his own name on it and trying to boost his brand essentially. But some vandalisms, well, they just kind of come out of pure hatred for the artwork or the artists themselves. So much so that they are driven to striking the paintings. So with that background, let's get into the artist once more a little bit before we get to the paintings themselves. Barnett Newman was born in New York City in 1905. His parents, Jewish immigrants from Poland. Man, they timed their move pretty good, if you ask me. Abraham and Anna arrived in the United States in 1900 for reference. So, that's... I don't know if they saw the writing on the wall. I know the area has had a rich history of anti-Semitism, but, just obviously, 40 years is still a pretty substantial amount of time, but they got out before everybody was really trying to get out, you know what I mean? So, as the son of these parents, he was really not a major factor in the art world right away, but he wore many hats. He's a man of many talents. Before his artwork began to grow in popularity, he did deviate from the family business. His dad owned a clothing manufacturing business. Barnett was a teacher in his early years, although he did help the store as well. He liked to write on the side, even dabbling in reviews and critiques and things like that. He also, while he was in college, studied philosophy and dabbled in politics early on in his career, ran for mayor in 1933. Following year, he didn't become mayor, but he does meet his future wife, Annalee Greenhouse, a child of immigrants as well, and even an immigrant herself. She was born in Palestine while her family was making their way from Russia to the United States. Now, over the next few years, Barnett and his wife, they called him Barney also, so every now and then I'm going to say Barney because I feel like that's more fun. So Barnett or Barney and his wife Annalee navigated their early years together through various professions and personal endeavors. In 1935, Barney, aka managed the theater troupe and also resumed work on his civil service magazine, which was called The Answer, and explored literature and education in New York further. By 1936, despite the initial publication of this The Answer, financial realities kind of forced him to return to teaching. He was a substitute art teacher, so that was not great. And it was kind of a battle trying to find a secure, stable employment in education and kind of dipping his toes into arts. He took some classes, started teaching, substitute teaching, and then really focused a little more on his own artwork, but had destroyed all of the artwork from this time. Now, he was also trying to kind of help his family out in the early 30s. Everybody's kind of still reeling. The Great Depression kind of still really heavy on everybody's bank accounts. His dad didn't close the store or the manufacturing facility, but all of the kids kind of did have to come in and help work that. Now, despite all of these struggles, Barney and his wife both became substitute teachers. She was also, I think maybe she was just an actual teacher, but then they kept trying to learn stuff. He further developed his interest in art, natural sciences, different things like that. And here it goes. So Annalee secures regular teaching position by 1939, and their personal dedication to each other's aspirations remains pretty evident. She's super pumped. I'm going to support him, and he's supporting her, and she believes in him as an artist, which is great foundations. By the early 1940s, Barney's focus kind of shifted towards natural sciences a little bit, and he started taking classes in botany and ornithology, which I'm gonna historically diagnose right now, but I think Barney had a little bit of the ADHD. What do we think? A little bit? Writing, painting, music, politics, botany? Maybe not, but come on. That's too many hobbies, dog. That's so many interests. The outbreak of World War II and the couple's move to a stable apartment in 1941 kind of put them in a transitional phase, and Annalee continued her education while Barnett started exploring further outside of traditional painting. He was starting to experiment a little bit. So that's fun, right? From 1944 on, he kind of continued to evolve from a writer and organizer of art exhibitions, and started to be recognized just as an artist, I mean, it wasn't good. He was a little controversial at first. People were like, what the heck is this guy doing? Because you gotta think, every new art movement starts off pretty rocky. People do not like them. So yeah, he initially was involved in the art world through organizations. He helped organize the pre-Columbian sculpture and Northwest Coast events, as well as, through writing for magazines. And even though he's not fully immersed in the art world, he's starting to meet people that are important in the art world, or he's starting to, mingle, starting to network. He would meet Betty Parsons, and then he would also have a working relationship with her, and then are also joined in by artists like Clifford Still, Tony Smith, and one Jackson Pollock. Look at that. In 1948, Newman made a significant breakthrough with his painting 1 Mint 1, marking the period of, real intense creativity. Because, once you kind of, these artists, once they kind of found that thing that would eventually be their thing, that's they went full tilt into it. Now, I want to stop and kind of describe his work here for a minute, because if you have not looked into it, into his philosophy or the background of it, it's kind of easy to dismiss. I'll admit, when I first saw it, I was like, okay, I get it, whatever. But Barnett painted these massive canvases, huge canvas paintings with solid or kind of even a wavering, a shimmering color on them. And then he would put what he called zips, which are striped-like things. And he called them zips basically because he felt that stripes were a secondary thing, where he felt that the zips kind of united the painting. They pulled everything together. So a stripe is like a slap, like an add-on, like a sticker almost. And he's like, that's not what this is. And people like to mock things like this and say, okay, you got a color, you got a stripe or two, but that's not what art is. That is simple. Anyone can do it. But you have to think about where this thought, this thought gets skewed, because these are artists that could paint. They were trained, they'd gone to salons, art schools, all these things. They learned from painters, learned the things they needed, but then they found that after the Second World War, figurative depictions of the world were not where their interests were, and that they felt that they should not be painting in a realistic or figurative manner because of the atrocities that the war had brought. Much like how Bauhaus came out after World War I and kind of turned art in Europe on its head with their fresh takes on things, so did American Abstract Expressionism movement. In Barnett's own words, he says, quote, "I felt the issue in those years was, what can a painter do?" And then he thought to, and this is another quote, says, "Start from scratch, to paint as if painting never existed before." And he mentioned, had a very philosophical outlook on things. And I think this gets lost on the surface level of contemplation about some of his paintings. Because, yeah, obviously, you see this painting and it's red and it's got a white stripe or whatever. And you're like, all right, what are we doing? What's the point? But contextually, these people just had their minds exploded with how deep and depraved, I don't know, the depravity of human evil that they saw after World War II was on a scale that nobody had seen before. Nobody really, we hear about what the Romans did to the early Christians, or things like that, Vlad the Impaler, and these real horror stories, and you're like, oh wow, that's crazy. But these people were seeing it as it happened. They're like, I know my cousin went to go fight the Germans, and they saw video of the atomic bombs on Nagasaki and Hiroshima. They saw this and they're like, okay, well now where do we go? What do we do as artists? Because this is kind of something, it's almost like humanity had a new start point. They're like, okay, so now we're in this new realm where what do we do? So that's what he's talking about. He's like, I'm starting from scratch, basically. We've never painted before. This is what painting is like now. And I don't hate that. I don't hate that outlook. That makes a lot of sense to me. And looking at these guys, and I never really looked into that movement as deeply as I thought I did, because I never really considered that, which is weird because I love history, so you would have thought that I would have put that together right away, but I did not. So anyway, here we are learning together. Now, I mentioned he kind of found his style, his thing, his whatever. Despite this, solo exhibitions in the early 1950s did not go well, critics condemning his work and sales being very minimal. Nevertheless, he persisted. He's gonna keep on trucking. The 50s kind of brought some challenges for him, but he persevered. He was excluded from a major art exhibition at MoMA, Museum of Modern Art, and then a legal battle against libel that ultimately was dismissed, which, luckily. And financial difficulties kind of sinking in. He's not getting paid for this, and he's putting a lot of time into it. And him and his wife taking out loans, and then also she's still a teacher this whole time. And teachers don't get paid very well, especially back then. But he started to get a little bit more recognition. A critic, Clement Greenberg, who praises art as deep and honest. Clement, for you movie buffs, is the man who Jeffrey Tambor plays in the 2000 film Pollock, about Jackson Pollock. That's who that guy is. So anyway, that's kind of cool. Now, his career started to kind of change a little bit. He wasn't putting out a lot in 56 and 57, but his work did get some attention because Ben Heller, a collector, started to buy some of his paintings because Jackson Pollock had directed him towards him. Said, hey, you should check out my man Barnett. He's got some cool stuff going on. Go give it a look. And he did. And he bought some. And so that kind of started to build his reputation, because at this point, granted, this is towards the end of Jackson Pollock's life, but Pollock was pretty popular. Not as popular as his paintings are now, I guess, but he wasn't hated anymore. He started overcome that hump. And so is almost like a passing of the torch. So that same year, when Jackson Pollock died in 1956, kind of affected Newman and their circle of painting friends. And as, art critics started to give him, they still kind of crashed on him a little bit. He continued to put out shows. He put out a show at Minneapolis Institute of Arts in 1957, and then later his first retrospective exhibit at Bennington College in 1958. And this exhibition garnered the interest of the art world, including British critic Lawrence Alloway. Alright, so in 1959, Newman's work began to gain international recognition with the Offentliche Kunstsammlung Basel. I don't know, that's an insane bunch of words. Becoming the first public collection to acquire his painting, followed by the MoMA, Museum of Modern Art in New York City. His influence on the younger generation of New York artists was solidified during the summer workshop at Emma Lake in Saskatchewan. In 1960s, he started dipping his toes into printmaking, leading to creation of the 18 cantos, and continued to develop his Stations of the Cross series. His work received critical acclaim with notable exhibition and sales. So, he's starting to actually make some money. And you got to remember, he was born in 1905. He's a little older compared to some of these younger painters at the time. So he's getting up there. His painting Vir Heroicus Sublimis was purchased by Ben Heller in 1961, and I think that one is at MoMA now. Newman's engagements in public dialogue and symposiums, along with the support of all these critics, started to lift him up. Right. 1966, his first solo museum exhibition, The Stations of the Cross, Lima Sabachtiani, at the Solomon R. Guggenheim Museum, solidified, he's there. He's got his own spot now, finally. And despite mixed reviews, the exhibition attracted widespread attention. Newman's work, which is, characterized by its bold use of color and scale, continued to challenge and influence, all these up-and-comers. Between 1967 and 1970, he continued to work. He started working on a painting series called Who's Afraid of Red, Yellow, and Blue, and created the monumental Voice of Fire for Expo 67 in Montreal. He also made a public stance in support of Israel during the Six-Day War and spoke on the spiritual dimension of contemporary art, emphasizing spiritual essence in art. The same year, he explored sculpture making. It creates the Broken Obelisk, which is... Those are pretty interesting. It's like a pyramid base, and then the top of an obelisk flipped up on its head, which is attached to the pyramid tip. and then the top of the obelisk, which is now the bottom, or the bottom of the obelisk, which is now the top, I guess, is like broken off, and it's kind of interesting. It's like looks very like it's balanced, but it looks like it could tip over, but it's all metal. It's kind of interesting. I like it. 68, he continued to engage with intellectual and art communities. Remember, he's a philosophy guy. He's continuing to do that. And he also protested against the actions of police by the Chicago DMC, and withdrew his work from an exhibition and planned a sculpture criticizing Mayor Daley. So he's active in the political arena. Remember, he ran for mayor in 33. It's just 34 years before this. That's crazy. By 1969, Newman's work received wider recognition, with one-man gallery show at M. Knoedler and Company showcasing his achievements of the 60s, including large acrylic works and triangle paintings. He actively opposed the Lower Manhattan Expressway, contributing to the campaign that eventually led to the cancellation of the project. Like I said, still involved in politics. 1970 reflected on the importance of experiencing art firsthand over reproductions, and participated in a social activism by signing the Declaration of Solidarity with Soviet Jews. He was honored with a Creative Arts Medal in painting by Brandeis University, and featured in Emile D'Antonio's film Painter's Painting when he discussed the societal implications of his art. His later years were marked by critical recognition, public engagement, and continued innovation in his art, culminating in some plans for a comprehensive retrospective exhibition. And it's cool that he was like getting a lot of positive feedback at the end of his life, because he did die in 1970, the age of 65, and obviously big loss for the art community. And he, the community still remembers him for all of his input and contributions to abstract expressionism, and also his philosophical approach to art and society. And that's not, the story doesn't quite end there, right? I mean, that's where his life ends on the timeline, right? But jumping back a bit, I mentioned the painting series, Who's Afraid of Red, Yellow, and Blue, which is a nod to the play, which turned into a movie. Elizabeth Taylor was in this movie called Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, which is, it's got a lot going on, but mainly a relationship that has some issues, and the primary issues are betrayal, miscommunication, things like that, right? These paintings, like many of his others, are rather large. The one which was attacked is 18 feet long and 8 feet tall. The size was also enhanced by his use of color, which dominates the frame. The series, Who's Afraid of Red, Yellow, and Blue, feature large sections of red that seem to swallow your eye and make it feel much bigger than it actually is. And it's already huge. Who's Afraid of Red, Yellow, and Blue, number 3, is our focus today. It is, as I mentioned, nearly 18 feet long and 8 feet tall. It is almost entirely a luster of intense, like, red, and the zips, right? His zips, not stripes, zips of yellow and blue on either side. Just a sliver on each comparatively, because this is huge. Immediately, it was met with disdain. People hated this thing. The sheer sight of it caused many to be so indescribably annoyed by its existence. Museums that housed it received long-winded, poetic ramblings of people who knew what art was and what it should be and what a museum should have and why they shouldn't pay to see stuff like that. And they foamed at the mouth with this intense color that invaded their corneas. And it's not just red. It's like impossibly red. It's also oil paint, which has that like shimmer quality to it. It gives it depth. This painting is one where he applied techniques to hide brush strokes that so it just felt like the red just kind of existed on this canvas always and forever. Like that's how it's always been. The longer you stare into it, the more questions you have. In one video I watched, they said, quote, "The mystery and when you look at a Barnett Newman are what makes them such great works of art. Endless novels have been written about the process of falling in love, but the experience of it is indescribable, and in a funny way, that's what Barnett Newman does with you. The painting seduces you with its beauty and wants you to look inside of it, but at the same time, it remains mysterious and withdrawn." And I really like that because I think it's important to think about, because some art just kind of moves you. It makes you feel things you cannot describe. And it just, some people work a long time in the art community to rationalize and quip about what makes art art and like what it's supposed to make you feel, and they rationalize this thing, and this is actually it's a statement about, and then they go on this thing, and it doesn't always have to be like that. Sometimes you just see a thing and you're like, wow, that makes me feel this way. We have all of the psychologies of colors going on. Those affect you in very different ways, and the sheer size. In another video I watched, a guy was talking about how the idea of some of these, with how big they are, they're trying to envelop you into a scene, not like a legitimate like landscape scene, but a scene of like, this thing's swallowing me, and it might as well be the sky because it's so gigantic and it makes you feel so small. And in the same way, like a primal feeling can occur from that. Like you're like, whoa, I'm almost like you get almost claustrophobic is essentially what the vibe can be. And Barnett has a quote that I found in my research that I kind of feel like going back a little bit to, trying to force a meaning on something or trying to build a meaning around something. He says, quote, "Aesthetics is to artists as ornithology is to the birds." And I feel like that kind of applies to that, like that whole sentiment, really. Like I mean, it's a little pretentious, but he's a philosophy guy. I get it. I mean, I don't get it, but like I'm gonna pretend I do. Anyway, back to the painting. It caused such an uproar that people would walk out. One woman, Barbara Visser, had seen the painting on a school trip, and she said of the experience, quote, "It kind of really annoyed me, really. Like, I didn't know what to look at, where to stare, what to do with it. And the only thing that the guide shared with us was the title, and the title is a question. Who's afraid of red, yellow, and blue? I got very angry, and I ran out of the museum, and I sat on the steps and was determined not to go in again. Another woman got sick. She's like nauseous at the thing. The letters and sick people were really just kind of the least of the worries for the Stedelijk Museum in Amsterdam. In 1986, a 31-year-old man named Gerard Jan van Bladeren, a Dutch painter, although not a famous one, was so angry by this painting. He felt the lack of any concrete figures, tangible subjects, that made it a barbaric travesty against what art should be in his mind. He was the type of person who saw abstract art as the single worst thing to happen to the art world ever. So when he read the title card on the wall and the question, "Who's afraid of red, yellow, and blue 3?" his lawyer argued that the artist enticed the reaction based on this. So Van Bladeren took out a box cutter and slashed vertical stripes, horizontal stripes through the canvas. Total length of these marks reaching 50 cumulative feet. While he was arrested, the people in the area, the Netherlands, actually loved that he had done this. They were like, this thing sucks. I'm glad somebody stabbed it. I wanted to stab it, but he beat me to it, or I just didn't. I wasn't confident enough I could do it. So yeah, this is where things get pretty interesting. I know you'd be thinking the attack would be the interesting part of this episode, right? And I mean, it really is, but it is super important, but kind of only as a prologue to the rest of this painting story, because you see, when people see abstract art, they go, I could do that. And they are not really thinking about what went into the painting, and what more than likely are not focused on tasks or methodology used in designing something like that. The statement, I could do that, is trash and false. And this story is why. The museum staff and several art experts stood around the lifeless body of this painting, which had been placed on the floor, began to theorize on the repair job. What's to repair? Where do we start? The red canvas? Duct tape it. Put the duct tape on the back side, throw it back up, good as new, right? Or just patch over it, paint over it. It's red. Easy day. Easy to duplicate. Right? Wrong. The idea of restoration or conservation came about, and nobody really wanted to take this job because they're like, whoa, man, this is crazy. This job, there's people that do it professionally, and these people were like, no, dog, I don't think I can do it. Now, the problem is that with this painting, it is red, but that's the problem. Like, it's red. Like, it's just red. If it were, a more intricate painting, you could hide the seams a little bit better in the repair job, and you could, kind of hide it in the detail. The devil in the details, right? I'm pretty sure that's not what that means, but that's what I'm putting in. So, people have restored partially burnt paintings, repaired 300-year-old paintings, removed varnish without hiding the surface. There's a really, really in-depth level of restoration that happens. And you think with all these skills, it could be done. Well, remember, this was 1986. These methods were around, but not where they are now. And the museum people approached a man named Daniel Goldreyer. He worked as a conservator out of New York City and worked with Newman when he was alive, back in the heyday, right? Big win, right? Someone work with Barnett, that's awesome. Having intimate knowledge of his work, that could be great. He's going to just be able to slice and dice that thing right back together. And he says he can do it with a 98% success rate, meaning 98% of the damage would be hidden. Hurrah, the day is saved. So the Stedelijk sends it off to New York. Goldreyer, she's like, I need some peace and quiet. This is a big job. You guys are going to have to leave me alone. So guy goes to work. Weeks turn to months. Months to years. Years turn to 3 years. And the museum starts to get a little antsy. Like, hey, man, remember that time, we sent you that painting? And, I like art, but working on something for like 4 years is kind of wild to me, right? Like, I work on a very small scale comparatively. Like, the moment I have an 18-foot long, 8-foot tall drawing, maybe it's going to take me years to do that. I don't know. But with me working on such a small scale, mostly in pencil, I cannot relate. Except for, when it comes to my procrastination and abandonment of jobs. In that aspect, I have a few drawings that are years old, but good gravy, man. But hey, he's like, hey, guys, I did it. So, hey, hooray. The museum said it looked good as new, put it up, and they placed a fence around it this time because nothing stops a box cutter more than a fence. That's a fact. Unfortunately, the fence was hopped. But not by who you think, though. A different conservator who was there, who wasn't employed by the museum, kind of just jumped the fence because he wanted to get a better look at this thing. Numerous people kind of all were like, all right, I mean, it looks okay, but the fence kind of kept him at a distance, and this guy said, I'm not having none of that. And the comments were that it looked like it was wall-like. And not because of how massive it is, but because it just doesn't have that same luster and glimmer to it that it used to. It looks like the paint has literal wall paint on it, a more dulled down, flat, simple latex paint. They commented that the intensity, the depth that the oil paint provided, and that this new version had absolutely none of that. The process had to be uncovered, so they needed to get to the bottom of this thing. They sent it off to a forensic lab to discover that there were 4 new layers of paint on top of the old ones, and not just to hide the slashes, but across the entire thing. He repainted over the entire thing, but the issue continues beyond that, because not only did he did that, and then all right, hold on. So they're like, hey man, you painted over this whole, you killed this thing. You killed it. It's been killed and you killed it again. You double killed this guy. Well, the issue is that before the painting was sent back to Amsterdam, the director of the museum had met with Goldreyer in New York and signed off on it. Like, literally, he was like, we're good to go. Now, job well done. Get it on the boat. This is a problem because with that seal of approval, the staff saying that he had ruined the painting even though he absolutely had, gave Goldreyer legal precedence to sue for defamation. The museum and the city that owned the museum panicked, naturally, and they had to settle. Part of the settlement meant that the museum could not speak about the forensic analysis done. But good news is that eventually it was released. And it does prove that Goldreyer did basically scam the museum and the city of Amsterdam because he did in fact paint over the entirety with house paint and used a roller to boot. On top of that, literally on top of it, he applied a varnish coat, which the painting never had varnish. And further, just kind of cemented this awful job that he was doing. They invested over $1 million now into this painting because of the legal fees and all of this, and the actual initial payment for him to do that. All right, so now where do they go? Well, after this, some even recounted the disrespect to the original work, that the lack of awareness or proper application ignored what Newman had done in his original. He carefully worked so his paintings so that they were not just an accent wall of a college kid's house. One thing I read that they felt that Van Blatteren at least attacked the painting because it affected him, but Goldreyer had slapped paint on it and called it a day. People definitely feel as though the painting is done for, so the museum keeps it hidden. Makes sense. The story doesn't end there, though, as somehow the lesser of two evils in this story, Gerard Van Blatteren, returns to the tale. This guy. See, he saw his slashing up of the painting as almost an artistic expression, which is ironic because that is the sort of thinking that he hated with the original art. They repaired it, which stole his artistic expression, and now he's really mad. 11 years after his first attack, and 7 years after the painting was restored, he returned to the Stedelijk to find his own old foe. "If you strike me down, I shall become more powerful than you can possibly imagine," the painting said as calmly as possible as Van Bladeren activated his lightsaber. No. That's pretty ridiculous. But they hid the painting, remember? So it's in a broom closet for Mr. Bean to fix. No, but Van Bladeren found a new target. This time, Cathedra, another different Newman work. A large rectangle of swallowing thalassophobia blue that pulls you in and off center white zip, creating two unequal halves. His aim deadly, his anger unmatched. He slices this thing almost identical to the strikes made on Red, Yellow, and Blue number 3. This time, he dropped propaganda on his way out, leaving a trail of writings that had no real point, just the ramblings from the diary of a madman. This was so evident that he was not even able to stand trial, the second trial, because they were like, we gotta put you in a hospital, dog. So they sent him to a psychiatric hospital. That's how unhinged he was after this one. Now, the repair of this one went a little bit better, way better, I'll say, than the last one. While some spots are visible, slashes have been repaired with surgical precision. Literally, the conservator was trained using the state-of-art surgical equipment, and they repaired it in that way. It took 4 years, and they didn't even varnish it, so that's pretty cool. Unfortunately, these two aren't the only instances of violence against Barnett. As the child of 2 Jewish immigrants, his paintings have been defaced by Nazi sympathizers. Another painting within the series of Who's Afraid of Red, Yellow, and Blue was attacked in 1982 by a suspected German nationalist who viewed it as an assault on the traditional German flag. Another piece was spray painted with swastikas, and one of his sculpture was vandalized by the reflecting pool that sits around it, being flooded with some white liquid, possibly like a paint probably, and then white supremacist propaganda left around it. Now, this is an unfortunate part of this story, and one that should be mentioned because it is important. And one podcast that I listened to about this spoke about the concern of copycat vandalisms, and that some people wouldn't even talk to them about the artwork because of this. Like, they thought that more copycat things could happen, and it's upsetting because the story here is very intriguing, and while the danger is there, I think knowledge is very much an important part of our lives, and trying to better understand the world around us and hiding things like this does not help, in my opinion. I also think that if you listen to my podcast, you aren't that kind of person, because you probably would have stopped around the MLK episode, you know what I mean? And that kind of leads me to this last bit of stuff right here, like is the art conservation, and it is fascinating. It has some flaws, which I'll get into in a minute, but I follow an account called Baumgartner Restorations, and it has a lot of Victorian art that they touch up. The varnishes, like they remove varnishes, touch-ups, do all sorts of fun things, and it's very impressive. But the technology of conservation and restoration is so much wider than just that. The way they approach and how to restore a painting and what they consider is really spectacular in a way. Like they consider all the elements it will be in, how long it will be in them, and what original materials are there, the chemicals used, the elements used in those chemicals. They use different devices that really show them what's all inside the painting. They can go below the surface level. They'll take it to a hospital and they'll x-ray it, and they'll do all these crazy things. And then when they go to add or correct things on a piece of art, they have to work in a way that's reversible so that the work can be updated down the road without damaging the art underneath, basically keeping the integrity as the technology continues to develop or upgrade. And some other restoration projects have not gone so well. I think probably the most famous, and you probably don't know it by this name, but it's pretty hilarious. Ecce Homo is a painting done in 1930, originally depicting Jesus by Elias Garcia Martinez, and restored by Cecilia Jimenez, and it turned the prophet into what I can only really describe as like a background character in an Edvard Munch painting, right? Like, if you think The Scream, if that name sounds unfamiliar. Now, Michelangelo is in this bit too, because someone tried to update the Sistine Chapel ceiling, and the eyes were lost in some of the characters' faces, which is not great. Leonardo da Vinci joins him in this attempt to lift the ink from one of his old journals, and resulted in the ink completely disappearing after the cocktail of chemicals that they used made it vanish. So they completely lost, ruining this thing forever. So way to go there. So, it's not like it's always foolproof, but, more like it has a lot of stepping stones and learning curves going on, right? So that's kind of it for this episode. I hope you guys enjoyed it as much as I did. I'm happy I finally got to talk art with you guys, and hopefully it was not boring. I don't know. Obviously for me, I like art, so it wasn't boring for me to look into it because that's my thing. But I don't know, some people don't like it, so let me know. If you like this, please go to the Facebook group, the page, tell me what you enjoyed, comment on the YouTube video, share the show with your friends, tell them something that you learned in this episode. If not, guess what? You can tell me what topic you think would be fun. I already have the next few planned, but you can go to Linktree in the description, and there's a button for topic suggestions. So click that, or you can send me an email, remedialscholar@gmail.com. Also, feel free to check out the merch in the link tree as well. Check out get you some sick duds, But yeah, if you have some suggestions, let me know. I'm happy to continue this ever-evolving process of learning about history and, some of the deepest, darkest, most random and interesting secrets. And I will leave you with this, the final quote from the philosopher, teacher, writer, and painter, Barnett Newman. What is the explanation of the seemingly insane drive of a man to be painter and poet if it is not an act of defiance against man's fall and assertion that he returned to the Garden of Eden? For the artists are the first men. Have a great week, everybody, and I will see you next time. Bye!